Lynell George.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to get right into it.
Okay.
My family's from Louisiana too.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So
You're
I
all
called
out
up my
here.
mom. I was
You're
like,
all out here.
Octavia's from Louisiana, her family. And my mother was like, I knew it because it's a whole bunch of magic in them books. Them women is magic. My mom and I are like,
I love it.
we listen to her books when we're on long road trips.
Oh, wonderful.
So down south, we have this saying that when somebody's food is really good, we say you put your foot all up in it.
Put your foot all up in it. That's right.
You put your foot all up in this. This book, it is what I love most about it, and I just finished reading it today.
Oh,
it is so soulful. Like,
oh, thank you.
We're in this time where, especially folks of my generation, we are looking for the women in our communities, the elders. So you have like, you know, Maxine Waters, we call her Auntie Maxine. We're looking for these public figures who are like, tell us, like, show us, like, the brilliance of the women who are the elders, who walk the walk, talk the talk, done the done. And reading this, I felt like, oh man, I got my elder back. I felt like, it really felt like she wasn't gone when I was reading this.
This can't tell you how much that means to me, because I've been walking around with her in my ears, you know, since I started in the archive. And the gift I wanted to give to other people is like, imagine having someone like that be in your ear all the time and kind of focusing your vision, focusing your ear, encouraging you by example.
Exactly. I was like, that part.
Example.
It's true, because I mean, the fact that I consider her a prophet because of the things that she wrote about, and because I'm like, oh, we're living some of her books for real, you know. Right. I loved on Tuesday, both of you all were saying, like, she was telling us, she tried to tell us, nobody was listening. She, you know, she was very prophetic.
Yes, she was.
Down to a pandemic called the pox and making America great again.
I mean, you get chills when you see that. And that was the thing and even rereading it, as I was saying the other night, you know, when we were having that endless heat wave, it seemed, and the fires, and this is the book I'm reading during it. And these things are coming up and I'm getting full on body chills. Even though I had read it before, there's something about reading it when you're in a moment like this about the pox. And then, and there was the campaign slogan too, you know, and we're in an apocalypse and we got this campaign running, you know, it's just crazy.
Yeah, no, my mother and I was like, oh, we in the pox. And we talk about the pox so much. Her and I have been rereading Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents, that whole Earthseed series over and over and over for the past 3 years. Like, it's just something new comes up every time we read it.
Right.
Which makes me want to ask you, how did you first get introduced to Octavia's work? What was the first thing you read? How old were you?
Wow. So given the mother theme and the woman, my mother was an English teacher here in LAUSD for 30 plus years. She taught junior high and high school. And she was always, like, we had books all over the house, you know, it's like here, and it was sort of a supplement to what we were going to get in school, because she didn't want us to miss out on anything and anyone. And she knew what we weren't going to get in school. So she had things on the shelves for us. So that was my introduction to Octavia was, you know, she bought these books for herself. I have her copy of Dawn, you know, I have her copy of Wild Seed, you know, those were her books. Okay. And so that was my introduction. And the first book I probably read in seriousness was Kindred. And that just like took me away, because I'm like a history person. Like so this idea of being in a book where the character is slipping through time, but there's no machine, you know, like, and I love how Butler would talk about that. She said, people keep saying that this is, science fiction, but I don't have there's no time machine in it. She just happens to slip through time. Yeah. And I love that, yeah. And we are getting pulled back and forth as we are today. It's the same thing, because we as Black people are being pulled back and forth emotionally, physically. So yes, there's a lesson, in that. So that was a way to go into history as well. And that was my introduction to her.
I like what you just said about being pulled back and forth even today, because one of the things that became so glaringly clear when I was reading this was the amount of intentional self-care. Oh, yeah. And the amount of intentional mindfulness that Octavia had in her day-to-day life. And I love that you start out with her in like Estelle, elementary school, yes. Right? Little girl. And just this, some of the notes the teachers were writing, yes. The things, and just from being a child, like having the wherewithal of, you talk about, or she wrote, I guess, that she was in this state of constant depression, I guess, in her childhood. Yeah. But how that sort of, it weaved in and out, because there are moments of like extreme self-doubt, but then at the same time, extreme like self-care to say, okay, exactly. I have this doubt, but also I need to still finish this thing because it's going to get done, doubt or no doubt.
Exactly. I'm so glad that came across, because I really did want to make sure that you saw her struggle, heard her struggle in her own words, but also saw how she somehow figured out a way to bounce. She would bounce, and that really essential quality that she had. And it did come from realizing she needed to check in with herself. And there were different ways that that part was an evolving thing for her too. She started with these adorable, like little girl diaries, Today I didn't do anything. Today I watched cartoons. Today I read comic books. Today I wrote. But as she gets older, those journals and these books that she called sessioning books later, if something had happened at school or at work, she would make time to go to these books and like, okay, let's break this down. What happened today? And how could I make this better the next time so I don't fly off the handle or cave into depression or don't say anything? How can I protect myself? And what do I need to do to be stronger tomorrow? Do I need to go on a walk? Do I need to meditate? So yeah, she learned to check in on herself a lot, and that was survival for her.
I think you hit it on the head. The fact that there's a passage, if I can just read it, just a little small paragraph that you wrote on page 151, and you wrote, "Underestimation is another form of disregard. It is meant to question her power, her ability to be in it for the long game. I've always feared being put in a box, the woman box, the Black box, the box marked curiosity. I remember wondering in school whether the few teachers who said good things about my writing said them because I wrote well or because they were amazed that I could write at all. Yeah. This dogs her, even with the gathering collection of books, awards, speaking engagements. It is the cloud that slides across the sun that dims even the most dazzling moments." When I read that, I was like, it was like the breath out of my body just went, because this is, everything about her life is ultra relatable, but that paragraph on page 151, she talks about being in the box. You know,
Yeah.
oh, you write so well for a Black person. Oh, you
Yes.
write so well for a Black woman. Oh,
Exactly.
it's about,
Yeah.
and it's just as you get more and more. And I was like, you know, that's what I mean about us really looking
Exactly.
for the elders to be like, what did you do when
What
you were
did you do? Exactly. Exactly that. Like, how did you survive this? And it's true. It's like, why does everything have to be a backhanded compliment? Qualified. You're special. You're different. She just had to really move through this minefield of that and recognize for herself, like give herself her own flowers, you know, because she wasn't going to get it straight away. She always had to wonder, you know, and I always think about people who were, you know, ahead of us, you know, like you said, it's like, how did they manage it? It's like, it's the way I felt when I first read James Baldwin, and I thought, you know, here he is, he's Black gay man who brilliant, and he's in these worlds where everyone is trying to diminish him at every turn. Same thing, you know. And so she's and I also noted in her notes there are lots of quotes of his, like she would write down his quotes too, like, so she found him a guide as well. So we find our guides, you know.
Yes.
We find our guides, and she became a mentor to other people too, through letters. And we can talk about that if I don't want to take you too far off of.
Oh no, I want to talk about it.
Okay.
I want to talk about it. Let's go wherever you want to go, because I mean, one thing I will say about your book, it left me, I'm like, I want a part 2 to this.
Oh.
I'm like, I want the part 2. It just,
Yeah.
I feel that, you know, and even in the back, you have like the bibliography, like all the footnotes of like each chapter, what the archive is very organized with like what boxes has what information. And I looked at all of those boxes you went through, and I was like, there has to be a part 2 to this. There has to be more.
There's so much. Yeah.
For as interesting, I think the first book that I read from Octavia was Wild Seed. Got sucked in.
Yes.
When I was in college, we were supposed to read Kindred, and I didn't read it. I've had the book forever. I just didn't read it. I was like, why did I not read this? Wild Seed was the first one, and I started with that series and just fell into the rabbit hole.
Yes.
And it's because of her writing that made me want to know, like, well, who is she?
Who is she?
Exactly. Who is she?
Yeah.
This is the first book that really goes into like those questions I had with the who is she? Because interviews are one thing, but like somebody, when they get home after the interview, they take off the fancy clothes and they in their own space, and then you're like, oh, wow.
Yes. And that's exactly it. Because I realized when I got into the archive the first time to do this project for Clock Shop, radio management.
Yes, Clock Shop.
And I was supposed to do a posthumous interview, and you know, and as I was thinking, well, what can that be? And Julia Meltzer, who's the executive director, she said it can be whatever you want it to be. And I thought, okay, that's wonderful. But then, of course, I came in and I was like, okay, there are more than 300 boxes here, thousands of pieces of material. Where do you start?
Yeah.
And where do you find that intimate voice? You know, that's what I wanted to do. Like, who was she? Like you just said, who was she pared down when she wasn't, you know, because she had not put on her public face. And so it took weeks to get to hearing that voice. But what I realized as I was moving through the archive, this idea of, you know, journalists, we were always talking about, we need access. And so when we set up interviews, we're always saying, well, we'd like to have, we'll ask for an hour, but we will push for more, you know? And then when I feel really lucky is like somebody will give me a lot of time, could be a week, could be a month, could be a year. But being in an archive like this, that's the kind of access you would never have as a journalist, because you're in somebody's head. Yeah. I'm looking over her shoulder. you know, I felt, there were days I felt like connected to that arm that was writing out that journal entry, or crossing out, you know, lines in a draft that she didn't like, and the whole day for her was ruined because like she did not get far enough. But then she back to that bounce again, get back. But that intimacy of what someone is like when their door is closed, they're in their comfy clothes. There's that line, and I keep thinking about it even, and I shared it with another journalist for Divide, where she's working so hard. She hasn't gone to the market, so she's trying to make, because I have popcorn and I have some ground beef, and she made some weird meal, and I thought, yes, that's the writer's life. And that's somebody who is like just dedicated. I got to work through this for my deadline.
Yeah. Well, I mean, her public sort of persona of what we know of Octavia, it's a very esteemed woman. You know, you see these photos of her and she looks very esteemed, look very regal, just this like, I'm a serious writer and my life is a serious thing. And that's this persona that we think. But in this, the beautiful thing that I love about the book is I'm a fan of people like, or extraordinary people who live ordinary lives. You know what I mean? Just ordinary folk who are just happen to be extraordinary. And this really brought that home for me. As like, well, I already knew the woman was extraordinary, but she's so ordinary. I was like, this could be my aunt. This is somebody in my family.
Yes. Exactly.
I know her. You know, you relate because it's like, I do know who this person is because this reminds me of so-and-so. I know someone like this. And that is what's inspiring, is that somebody that I know who could have been in my family, who was an ordinary, regular folk, really did something absolutely extraordinary. And it allows me to give myself some space to know that, look, she was grappling with the same things that so many creatives, so many writers, so many folks in the artistic world, anyone who has a dream about something that they see their life as and has passion, these things that she deals with, we're all going to be faced with some of that at some point or another. And, you know, part of me feels like it's nice to read this because she is somebody I think about now. I loved on Tuesday night when someone said if she had a Twitter, like what would she be tweeting? It's like, hey, I wish she was here for like those reasons, to be like, you know, bless us with your brilliance during these great moments. Like, you know?
Yes. Exactly. And keep us on track. And, you know, and as you said, because there is something about like, that bite-sized wisdom, and she could just pare things down to something that would be simple. And as you said, the thing about her too is like, looking at her process, it demystifies everything. Like people are like, no, you don't just like, you know, as I said the other night, you know, she had a muse when she was a child, like she like gave her muse a name, but very quickly she kind of kicked that muse away, and she realized, no, what you do to create something is you commit to it every day for X amount of hours a day, and you may throw all those pages on the floor and have to start again, but you sit in a chair and you make it happen. And there's this famous quote of hers that kind of keeps coming up in the archive, and it's also in a piece in Bloodchild. And she's, forget luck, forget inspiration. It's habit, you know, and that's what she did. So again, back to demystifying, we saw people in our lives, we've seen our families get up and go every day. They may not be inspired, they may be tired, they may be whatever, but they get up and go. And that sort of demystifies, like people keep asking me like, oh, do you know, I haven't like that's important too, because, you know, asking about like, I mean, she got that MacArthur grant fairly late-ish in her life, but she hadn't, I mean, aside from Clarion, she hadn't had any fellowships and hadn't gone away, and she didn't get to go and write in a beautiful little cottage in the woods. You know, she wrote at her kitchen table. You know, she sat on her porch and wrote. You know, she wrote wherever. I mean, it was not this romantic thing. It was work. But it was a beautiful escape for her, you know, to create space for us to walk through and that has been the beauty of this, because I have now met so many people just in the process of working with her work. She brought us all together in her room, in this tent she's created, you know, with her industry, you know, her industriousness.
Yeah. Yeah. I have one more little question that is
sure.
From Octavia. You write, or you found, today, 1999, I have several novels published and in print, and every now and then I teach a workshop. 30 years from now, when I'm in my 80s, what will I be doing?
That was bittersweet, running up to that one, because she was waiting to be free to have time. She had plans. She wanted to open schools and libraries for children who did not have access, because libraries were the thing that fed her, and books fed her. She had plans about different kinds of books. We only see sketches of what she was thinking about, but I think, you know, she did not get to that place, but she did leave us with a lot. And I think we're responsible now to try to help take her ideas ahead. And, you know, but that was really poignant. That hit me really hard when I saw that.
Yeah. But it also makes me think, like, my mind, once somebody said, what would she be like if she was on Twitter? I just keep thinking about, in these times, during the pox, social media, like her being somebody that it's like, yeah, we looking to you.
That's true. And she took that, exactly that, and she took that very seriously. She talked a lot about being a news junkie. And there's a point in archive where she's like late high school, college age, and she's making lists of what it is she wants to do when she grows up. And journalism is something that's interesting to her. And of course I'm like, ooh, okay, you know, because, you know, I'm the reporter, right? And looking at her, I'm thinking she has all the skills. She knows how to do deep research, like 360 research. She knows what kinds of questions to ask. She cares about the news cycle, so she understands exactly what you're saying. She's like keyed in, and she's thinking days ahead on stories, because when you're a reporter and you're putting your story list together, you have to think about the story for the next day and the next day. So what's the story we want to read in a week? That's the way she thought. But she was thinking decades ahead. So she had that gift, but the only thing that kept her from doing it was her shyness and being an introvert. And I kept thinking she would have been able to get through that. I know it, but we got a bigger gift, you know, with what we do have. But you're right. I think she was so clued into news. I think like things like social media would have kept her from doing her big work, but she knew how to, she knew how to like cordon off her time. So she could have been tweeting and giving us recommendations on what to do. She wrote letters. It was funny. There's a journal entry. I think it's the day of or day after Martin Luther King was assassinated. and she's writing about that. She's referring to King in a very familiar way. And I thought, yeah, so even as a young person, she understood that it was important to respond to news. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
The way that the book is laid out, it makes me want to, like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to visit the archive.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of things that were kept. I make fun of my mother because she still has report cards from me and my brother when we were in kindergarten. And I'm like, why do you have that? And she's like, you may be famous one day. Somebody's going to want to see that. And I'm like, nobody wants to see a report card from when you're in 3rd grade. But I was like, there's these report cards in here in the beginning of the book. And you get to see what teachers are saying, what her mother is responding to with these report cards, and then how she starts to formulate, back as a child, like how she's going to be protecting herself.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly.
And
exactly.
It just keeps this layering of how you invent yourself, present yourself, with, this layer of protection around her in the teenage years, and then early, and it just, I saw that pattern.
Yes, absolutely. This construction. Exactly. Yeah. And she was like, okay, this is what I need to do. Cause this is what I figured out what people think of me. How much of this do I internalize? Mm-hmm. And how much do I really try to extract as quickly and fully as I can in order to manage, and not just survive, but thrive. Yeah. So these constructions, and I won't, I think it's in a way it was armor, but also it was, I think, again, like when she is creating a narrative, she's creating a narrative for herself and her life too. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. And it was, for survival. You're absolutely right. She did it so she could survive this moment. Right. But as you were talking about the saving of things too, I was thinking about that too, because it was clear that some of the stuff she did look back on. I don't know how often she looked back on, the report cards, but she would refer to things that had happened to her early in her life. They stayed with her. Mm-hmm. But she tried very hard not to let them bury her. Those assumptions.
Yes. Yes. She had this way of like how she constructed herself, but she never closed off herself to the things that were important. Like she was very generous. She had a very generous heart in terms of wanting to help her family with her mother, wanting to help people who were like her, the children who were coming up, and just she was very just generous. And you mentioned about her being a mentor over letters. That part of her was never closed off. Right. In the layers of her protecting herself, she almost seemed like she had some social responsibility of like wanting, like that was in her purpose too, of like, you give back.
Exactly.
I can do more. I will be doing more. The paying it forward, that always seemed to have been in her mind.
And I think about how busy her days were, from, she'd get up at 3 a.m. and start writing, and then go on a walk, then take a shower, then get on the bus and go, because she did not drive her entire life. Get on the bus, go to school, then get on the bus, go to work, then come back home. But she made time to respond to mail, and especially young writers. So it's kind of lovely to see these letters where she encourages people to write her back, because I know she would have wanted to have that herself. As a child, or as a young person in high school, college, trying to think like, how do you do this writing thing, and she really did not know how to do it, and had to really figure it out. So now she can help people, and she made time when there was no time. to do it.
I haven't asked you, but where did the book come from you? Was this an idea that you had when you were writing the interview for the Clock Shop? Mm-hmm. Was this something that actually was like on a bucket list, to-do list from way before Clock Shop came in there? Were you like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do a biography of Octavia one day, and I'm gonna do this, and where did it come from with you saying, I'm gonna dig into this and make it?
It really did bloom in that reading room while I was working on the interview. Because I really thought, okay, you know, I knew that the Clock Shop piece had to be done in X amount of months because we were launching in time for would have been 10 years after her death.
Right.
So we had to move quickly, but that archive, it whispers at you. And so things I would see in the archive, and one of the things was this quote about the dancing bear. You went, you know, in that section earlier where she's talking about where will I be, you know, in the future. I don't want to be put in a box. That one really like hit me hard. And I thought, so I wrote that down and photographed that page. And then when she started, and then I started paying attention to these really modest objects that I kept going back to, some of the notebooks. I just liked holding them, you know, and they still felt very electric and alive, not to be woo-woo about it, but they do. They feel like you're holding somebody's intimate notes. So there's something about that. And then I was paging through an interview, and she was often asked, you know, what good is science fiction for Black people? And so she always would come up with these answers, but one was what they asked her, what is science fiction to you? And she said, it's a handful of earth, a handful of sky, and everything around and in between. And that bowled me over. It was like, that's her life. And she grounded it in the simple items of her life. And we all have earth and sky we move on and through. And so that sat with me. And I thought, and it became the organizing thesis. So it really was organic. It was so organic. I did not plan to do this because I was like, oh, you know, when I'm done with this, I'm going to go back to my other project. Nope. I was in.
You got sucked into the OEB archive vortex.
I certainly did. It shocked me. It really was like, oh, guess I'm doing this.
Yeah. Is the archive, is it publicly accessible? How do they use the archive now?
You have to apply to be a reader in order to get in. I know there's been some talk about doing more exhibitions and doing more fellowships that allow people, because I do not have a PhD. I'm not like, you know, and the fellowship I actually won to work was 3 months of work, or it's for non-traditional scholars because I'm a journalist. So that was my way in. So I think they're looking at doing those kinds of fellowships to give people who, you know, are not, you know, working on a, you know, PhD. Postdoc and PhD. Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah. Cause I thought about, we were thinking about this actually yesterday when I was talking to another friend who has been working in the archive as well, who is a teacher. And she was saying, you know, I think it's important for as many people to see, and that's why the book was important. You want to see just what you were describing. I want to see this stuff that makes this not feel so mysterious and impossible to reach, you know, and I think that for me was the thing, is like, she used the same dime store notebooks. I bought those little Mead notebooks that I would buy over at Save On or wherever, you know. I have those same notebooks in my collection. You know, she wrote like magnificent masterpieces in those little 69-cent notebooks. I think we need to see that.
And she rode the public bus, and like
Exactly.
she walked down the streets, and like I love that
Exactly.
she had this tone with the neighborhood, the streets she walked down, the
Thank
street
you.
vendors that would be there. This guy selling the fruit, and the Mexican stand over here with this and that.
Yeah.
Just like this is a real person who is really, you know, there's this mystique that's around her in this public space because she is so, you know, applauded and awarded. And I mean, she's a MacArthur genius. It's like, you know, that is the top, right? So you, to know that it is possible that this is the person, I'm like, I take the bus. I use that. I, you know, all of those things. Yeah. This book is so timely. It is the kind of inspiration and the kind of hope and the kind of like realistic, intentional sort of, this is something that I feel is very appropriate for this special time that we're in. Yeah. In this really interesting year where people are pausing and thinking about life and thinking about what's important to them. And to know that somebody who's considered to be so a giant in her field, a giant in her legend, an icon, and to know that this is just she's us, she's me, she's you.
That's right.
She wasn't, you know, like you said, it wasn't some romantic, her writing on the coast of blah, blah. She had a very day-to-day nuanced life, dealing with the same real world stuff. Exactly. You know, the money was not rolling in all the time. No. And she still made way for her to be able to keep pushing regardless of what was going on. Exactly. And I love that you captured that spirit, captured that essence about it. And I got this wonderful signed copy at Essewan.
You did? Oh, good. I'm glad you got a signed one. Yes, okay, great.
Essewan Books, for sure. Essewan, I know the guys at Essewan well, Todd and James. I was their neighbor for many years. When
That's right. You were right across, right across the way.
To hear that, you know, Octavia considered that bookstore, which has its own amazing story and history in itself. Yes. That was one of her favorite bookstores here.
Yeah, she made a point to always to be there, and that was the other great thing about the archive. And we were trying to show a slide of it, but I think it was too small to see. But there was a page from her address book, and in the back it's just a list of contacts for bookstores. And Essewan, of course, is on there with James's name, and Vroman's is on there with 2 clerks who still work there, you know, as well. And then my old boss, I used to work at a bookstore, her name was on the list too. And I just think, and these were all independent bookstores. And this was like her, like what would have been a speed dial now. You know, this was on this one page. And these are the people she called, you know, when she wanted to, you know, get on the calendar, you know, with them. And I have a friend who, because she didn't drive, and sometimes she would be out at night, way across town, he would offer to drive her back, and she would say, "Oh no, it's fine. I can take the bus." And be like, "No, I'm gonna take you home." But at readings, you know, and I just thought she really had this, and she would linger and talk to everyone. So back to that community thing, you know, and how important it was to be in these stores in particular. So she would linger, and she didn't want to break with the community, even though I know that interaction, big crowds, made her uncomfortable. But those intimate gatherings where she could be with people who she could see benefited from a story, or they wanted to tell her how much her work mattered, or they just had questions. Again, back to like, well, how did you do this? I think it was important for her to be in those community spaces. And that's why she just did make that point to do them.
Mm.
You know?
Well, this has been such a treat for me. I love it.
Oh,
This is
thank you.
a masterpiece. You did it with a lot of heart and soul. Like I said at the beginning, reading this, it feels very soulful. And I can feel yours and hers throughout this. This is a beautiful tribute. And do you consider it a biography? Because it feels like hybrid of a biography and like a real study case into like, sometimes I feel like we're like diving into her world almost scientifically as you're like piecing it together, and you have the, we can see what you're looking at because there's images in the book as well too.
Right. I think it's more the latter, which you nailed it. It is, I really did kind of look at it as, how do you tell someone's story in objects that are important to them? Because, I know people are going to be doing like traditional biographies about her and literary studies. I wanted to go really deep on, like, as you said, it's like, how do you do this with, there's not a whole lot. I mean, she didn't focus on what she didn't have. She focused on what she had.
Yes.
And she made a huge, beautiful, magnificent life out of that, a life of the mind and a life that kept opening up to opportunity. And it was not easy, but she did it. And that's why I think, like, looking at, again, those dime store notebooks and the bus pass and the little clippings for, books that are about affirmations and, books on tape and all these little things she tried to do. Just try it on, let me see if this will help. And it did. So that to me was important to be able to convey to people. It's like, we're going to look at these dozen objects, and these dozen objects are a recipe. And you can use one, two, all yourself, or you could pick yours and figure out, like, that's why I love the calendar so much. These are calendars she probably got like at the dentist or, wherever. But she repurposed those calendars into all kinds of different things, tracking time, tracking pages. Sometimes she would pull them off and write her affirmations on the back of the calendar, the white space of the calendar, and put them up on her walls. So there's magic in these objects, and that's what I wanted to do. So it's puzzling together a life.
Superb. You did it. You did a good job. I love it. Thank you for being a part of Queensfest 2020 and sharing this with us.
Thank you.
This audience that's going to be watching this Octavia, Afrofuturism, her books, especially now that a lot of her things are being turned into film and television projects currently. It's just nice to be able to introduce her life to generation after generation like younger and younger and younger generations now. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm honored you reached out, and I'm so happy to participate. And especially, as you said, in this crazy time, I think any tool we have that will help us get through, and what's going to help us is going to be inside, and that was the other thing that was, I finished this book right when this was getting ramped up. I was finishing, and the last public event I went to was to see Toshi Reagan at UCLA for the Parable of the Sower opera, and I thought about that, and I thought that went in the diary, my own diary, and thought, that's pretty fitting. That's the last thing I did.
Wow.
Where, you know, as in public and we embraced people. And if it had been a day later, it wouldn't have happened, you know? So I think that was also significant. I thought, now listen to that. Mm-hmm. Octavia wants you to listen to that too, you know? So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. And if there's unless there's something else that you want to share, I think
you really covered it.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, unless there's something, and if you need something later, just let me know.
Okay.
You know, I really appreciate you. I was so thrilled. Like, yes, I know who you are.
I told my mom, I said, Mom, I emailed the writer that did the Octavia Butler book, and I was just like, hi, my name's Michelle, I'm an arts entry. And she's like, I know who you are. And so my mom, my mother, it's, reading, I like that there's like parts in the book where her mom gets to speak, where, yes, you see the mom interacting with the school, but also there's the relationship between her and her mother is just so yes, sweet.
Yes.
And, Octavia felt misunderstood even by family members.
Yes.
But she understood why they didn't understand her as she got older, you know?
Yes.
And there's just, the woman is just brilliant. I mean,
and that's the thing, is like, that's what, like, I would have wanted. You need one person in your life too, that is sort of like, I don't fully understand it, but I'm going to support you. Like that's, and that's, even though I don't really get it. And so the fact that her mother was like, I'm going to give you this typewriter. And I know no one else really thinks like that's an expense. Why would you give her something like this? But that was the key in the ignition, and I love how she really did not know how to use it. She had to figure out how to use it and get people to type things for her for a while. But that's the sort of thing that floats you, yeah. And I love that, like you said, I love that relationship, and there are really beautiful little things in the archive. Like her mother has written her a note to give to one of the teachers that they were trying to take her to school, and her mom's car had broken down. And so they were going to be late. And it's just this, all it says is, Estella is late because the car broke down. And it's in this beautiful handwriting, this careful handwriting. And the fact that she kept that too, it's like, it's these, and I think to me, that is like, that's your mother's embrace. Like she stopped rushing for her own day, wrote her a beautiful little note to take to her teacher that just put her, that embraced her as she walked into school and had to like deal with whatever was going to happen. So
mm-hmm. It made me think of my best friend has a saying about her family and her mother particularly, which is salt of the earth.
Yes.
Salt of the earth people.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that like really embodies how I think about Octavia and her mom in that relationship and her family.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And it just seemed like she's so protective of Octavia, and but they certainly didn't agree, because Octavia had her opinions about all kinds of things that were counter to but they found a way to exist. And there's even like one of her mother's diaries in the archive that she has, and it's and it's a kind of a beautiful little like duet there at a certain point, because her mother of course is worried about the same things Octavia is later, paying the bills, her own loneliness, wondering if she can do this, as a single mom. And then there's the joy too, of like, and that's the thing, I guess that's the thing I really want to, end with, is that for all the struggle, and there was struggle, and as we said, all the way to the end, she found joy, you know, and it would, and like I said, she would reward herself with certain things. There's a beautiful picture of her in the archive, and you can even find it online, where she really loved the outdoors, and she really did use these trails up in the San Gabriel Valley. And she writes about it in Parable of the Talents, the big trees, the redwoods in Altadena. But she really wanted to get up to the Northwest. And I'm so glad she was able to do that, because she said, I always loved the color green. I always loved being around lush trees and grass. And so there's this gorgeous picture of her in a meadow with her arm around this horse. And she's like beaming. And I thought, I'm so glad she got to do that too. Like, that was part of something she wanted to be, she wanted to experience, you know, so she knew how to figure out how to navigate to her joy too. And I think that's another thing that we have to remember too, like joy comes, it's not like we're going to have like this road of joy. It is in those moments. And she knew when to recognize that she had reached them. She certainly wrote about them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was wonderful.
Thank
and
you.
I'm going to hit you up offline.
Okay, please do.
After this, yeah.
Okay, please do. Please do.